I do one work, and you all marvel. You know, this word marvel in the original language, in the Greek, means to mysteriously wonder. Remember what that one miracle was that he performed that they were thinking about, they want to kill him for? Well, it was in John chapter 5. It was a paralytic man who had for 38 years, almost 4 decades, had been paralyzed, and his friends, family, the rabbis, all of them used to lay him beside the pool of Bethesda. You remember what the scriptures taught? And here, this man was emaciated. Can you imagine not walking for almost 40 years? You know, being nothing but skin and bone. You know, if you don't exercise, you don't get up and walk, you even forget the ability of how to walk. And here this man, laying there, is wanting to be healed. They believed that as soon as the waters would be stirred, that here you would get into the water and you would be healed. Well, that's what they believed. Well, here Jesus comes up to this man, and you know what? It was the worst man. Now, this ought to be an encouragement to all of us. He didn't go to the best person there. He didn't come to the easiest person to minister to, but Jesus went to the worst, the most emaciated, probably the person that was in the worst physical condition of anybody there. And Jesus says to him, do you want to be healed? And of course, he immediately, he never asked Jesus to heal him. He just says, I have no one to help me, get into the water. He's such bad shape, he cannot pick himself up to get into the water. And Jesus tells him to be healed and tells him to do something. Remember what it was? Pick up your mat, your bed, and go. And you remember what happened? Instantly, Jesus healed him, put muscle on his bone, and made him and taught him and gave him the mental capacity to be able to get up and walk. Now, he didn't sit there and stumble, the scripture doesn't say. It says that he was made complete, he was healed, got up, and what did he do? Pick up his bed, and he walked. The same Jewish rabbis that probably laid him there and did it every day, they see him getting up walking. You think that they would have, whoa, look at this. Can you imagine this? Here he comes walking by and they say, what are you doing carrying your mat? What are you doing on the Sabbath day carrying your mat? Their self-righteous legalism is coming out, right here. And here they're not looking at, this miracle, not looking at anything that's transpired. And Scripture says, from this point on, the Jews, the rabbis, sought to kill Jesus. Because the man said, he healed me and he told me to pick up my bed and leave. And then look what he says in verse 22. Jesus is going to get now to the meat. He says to those, he says, Moses therefore gave you circumcision, not that it was from Moses, but from the fathers, and you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. Now let's look at the scriptures for a second. Here we have some covenants that have been given in Scripture. We have from the time of Abraham, we have the Abrahamic covenant, and then we have the time of Moses, the Mosaic covenant, and then David, the Davidic covenant. These were promises made by God to the people. Promises, covenant promises made. And here at the time they're saying, did not Moses give you circumcision? But then he says, that qualifies it, not that it was from Moses, but from the fathers. Moses reiterated it, but wasn't it originally given by Father Abraham? It was. From actually Genesis chapter 17, verse 12. In fact, if you look at it, there was instructions given that the promise was made that here for the Jewish people, that all the males from Abraham, all of his manservants, all of those that lived within his household, that all would be circumcised. Now, was this something new to Abraham? Listen to this. This came from rabbinical writings. This is what it says, from the time of Abraham. This is rabbinical historians. They write, circumcision was not entirely new at the time period in history of Abraham, but the special religious and theocratic significance then applied to it was entirely new, thus identifying the circumcised as belonging to the physical and ethical lineage of Abraham. That's what God's intention was, that from now on, all those circumcised would be Jews. That was part of the intention. But then they write, without divine revelation, the rite, the ritual, would not have had the distinct significance. Thus it remained a theocratic distinction of Israel. The symbolism had to do with the need to cut away sin to be cleansed. It was the male which most clearly demonstrated the depths of depravity, because he carried the seed that produced depraved sinners. Thus, circumcision symbolized the need for profoundly deep cleansing to reverse the effect of depravity. So the Jews took it upon themselves, and from God believed that this was a cleansing, a partial cleansing for this man, that his heirs, from his seed, would be doing God's will, not their own will. That was the significance that it meant to the Jews. Now here, this is the Old Testament scriptures. Listen to them. This is what the Jews believe even to this day. In Deuteronomy 10:16, they are told, therefore, circumcise the foreskin of your heart and be stiff-necked no longer. God is telling them, this is symbolic because you need to be changed internally. The circumcision of the heart. Deuteronomy 30 verse 6. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. In Jeremiah 4:4, circumcise yourself to the Lord and take away the foreskin of your heart. You men of Judah, inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my fury come forth like fire and burn, so that no one can quench it, because of the evil that you are doing. They knew that this was all symbolic to show that there had to be a changed person, a change from within that God would do. Now look, and here Jesus pointing this out. They knew this. And then in verse 23, Jesus says to them, if a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses should not be broken, are you angry with me because I made a man completely well on the Sabbath? Listen to the depths of what he's saying. Here, what were the Jews doing? They were following Leviticus 12, verses 1 through 3, that said very clearly that on the 8th day, all males were to be circumcised. In other words, here's the time frame. A child is born on the Sabbath day. 8 days from that day is going to be another Sabbath. What does that mean? That means that they have to be circumcised on the Sabbath. Now, this is all symbolic, right? This is an argument from the lesser to the greater. What he's saying here very clearly and is showing their hypocrisy, and is very evident. He says in this argument from the lesser to the greater, you're saying to me ceremonial cleansing of one part of the body is permitted on the Sabbath through the act of circumcision. What he's saying is cleansing of one part of the body is going to be okay, even though it's ceremonial, if you do it on the Sabbath through circumcision. That's the argument from the lesser. But here's what Jesus is saying, going to the greater. He says on them, he says, here I, Jesus speaking, and says, I've actually completely healed the entire body of this man. Is this not permitted on the Sabbath? See, in their minds, if they can justify what they did in a ceremonial cleansing, here what Jesus did was absolutely 100% allowed to be done on the Sabbath day. Who has the right to heal? God himself does. He makes no excuses to anyone. And here he says in verse 24 very clearly, do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. Their self-righteous legalism is very, very clear. And what he's saying to them, you need to exercise moral and theological discernment so that you may know the truth. Is the truth evident? Can you see, even to this day, they say, Jesus broke the Sabbath. You believe Jesus broke the Sabbath? I think Jesus did exactly what the King of Kings and Lord of Lords would do on the Sabbath. Let me close.